Shalom, everybody. This is a special report because it is the first report of the new year, 2025. And of course, we're all sad about what happened in the terror attack in New Orleans, in Louisiana, on the early morning hours of January 1st. So from Israel, we send our condolences to the families who lost loved ones, but also for those who are injured. Let's keep praying for them. Well, greetings, VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this video. As we move into 2025, there is a dark shadow over the Prime Minister's office as our long-standing leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, is in the hospital recovering from surgery. Meanwhile, the war against Iran's proxy groups in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen aren't taking any breaks, and Israel's economy continue to struggle. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, friends, there's a lot of ground to cover this week, and we'll start with an update on the negotiations for a long-term ceasefire in Gaza and a return of the nearly 100 hostages remaining in captivity there. Over the last week, there was optimism that a deal was close at hand, but it still hasn't happened, and the leaders of both Israel and Hamas are blaming each other for the impasse. On the Hamas side, there are a few different issues, including the fact that it's unclear who is really in charge. There are also conflicting reports about how many fighters Hamas still has in the field and who is leading them. It's beyond question that thousands of Hamas fighters have been taken out by the IDF in the last 14 months of fighting. Mountains of weapons and ammunition that Hamas had stored up has been found by the IDF and either destroyed or captured. Dozens of underground factories meant to produce new weapons have been demolished along with tunnels and bunkers. Yet somehow, Hamas is still managing to recruit new members. Somehow, it's still managing to find weapons and ammunition to attack IDF troops with, and as we'll talk about it in a moment, they even still have the ability to fire rockets into Israel. I don't get it. However, there's also some doubt about how many hostages Hamas is holding, how many might be held by someone else, and how many of them are even alive. What's beyond question is that Hamas certainly does have the ability to return at least some of these hostages to Israel. Now, incoming U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has said that he expects Hamas to return the hostages by his inauguration day on January 20th, or they'll be all hell to pay. And on Tuesday evening, again, he weighed in. Speaking to reporters from his New Year's Eve party at Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, Trump declared that Hamas better let the hostages come back soon. However, diplomats from Arab countries who are familiar with the negotiations told the Wall Street Journal newspaper this week that they doubt a deal will even be reached by January 20th. One reason is that Hamas is demanding the release of some very, very high-profile Palestinian security prisoners from Israeli jails in return for the hostages. This even includes Fatah leader Marwan Barghouti, who is serving 5 life sentences, one for each of the people Israel could prove in a court of law that he'd murdered. He is probably responsible for more murders than that, but really, how many life sentences can you give one person? In any case, he is assessed to be at the least as dangerous as Yahya Sinwar was, and so it is somewhat unthinkable that Israel would release him from prison. But that's what Hamas is demanding. So you can see how we've arrived at an impasse, with all due respect to President-elect Donald Trump's tough talk. Now, as I mentioned before, Hamas is not just continuing to hold hostages and make maximalist demands. They also are continuing to take offensive actions against IDF troops and even the rockets into Israeli territory. The latest rocket attacks occurred exactly at midnight on December 31st. Yes, friends, that's right. Hamas paid for some of the New Year's fireworks this year. Although it's been just 2 rockets, one with being intercepted and the other falling in an open area, thousands of Israelis who are still traumatized from October 7th massacre and all the rockets that have been fired at them since had to once again run to their bomb shelters. This has also been happening a lot over the past several days as the Houthis, those fun-loving guys down in Yemen, the deep south, which is over 2,000 kilometers from Israel, have fired one ballistic missile at central Israel on a nightly basis. The Arrow and U.S. man-THAAD systems have been dutifully shooting down all of these incoming missiles outside Israel's airspace, and one even landed in an open area in Saudi Arabia. But one missile penetrated the defenses and landed in a playground in a Tel Aviv suburb. Another one was intercepted, but the warhead fell forward into Israel and destroyed a school in a suburb of Jerusalem. Fragments of other intercepted missiles have landed in other Israeli communities, causing damage, but thankfully no casualties. Now, this is a good place to pause for a moment and remind everyone here at Vision for Israel, we've been providing tools to Israeli communities and civil defense teams to help them defend their residents against incoming rockets and other threats. The most obvious tools we've been providing are bomb safety shelters, which give people a place to run and to go to when the rockets are coming in. And we are reminded that we have often had 90 seconds or less to find a safe place when we hear the sirens. We've also provided equipment and training to medical first response teams, firefighting crews, and other civil defense personnel. All of this has cost a lot of money, time, effort, and energy, but it's been well worth it, people. Even saving one life is worth more than millions of dollars. In this present emergency, I can say with absolute certainty that lives have been saved by the bomb safety shelters we've placed and also through our other efforts. So if you'd like to help out, you can visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. There you'll see some of the ways we've been trying to be a blessing to Israel in this present season of war, to say nothing of the 30 years before this war started when we were very busy providing assistance in many other ways. One of the other ways we provided assistance is by building our Millennium Center in Modi'in near Jerusalem. This facility includes a large warehouse where we bring in, sort, package, and distribute an enormous amount of groceries, household items on a daily basis. Hundreds of families all over Israel depend on the assistance to maintain a basic quality of life and dignity. This has been a vitally important part of our work for a long time, and in the last 15 months, it's become even more needed than ever before as the economy of Israel has been battered along with the population. Now, speaking of the population, the Central Bureau of Statistics released their end-of-the-year report on Tuesday, showing that the general population grew by just 1.1% in 2024 and now stands at 10.027 million people. Although many Western countries would like to have it, this is the lowest rate of population growth Israel has had since the COVID crisis of 2020. Now, sadly, a big part of why it's happening is emigration. That is, 82,700 people left Israel last year, while only 32,800 new immigrants arrived. However, 23,800 Israelis who have been living abroad also came home to live in Israel once again. Those of you who are good at math will say there's still more people who left the country than arrived, and that makes you wonder how we still ended up with growth. Well, that's a good question, and it can be answered in one word, and that word is babies. Yes, Israelis have a lot of babies, and in 2024, 181,000 babies were born here, leaving us with a net population increase after accounting for immigration, and deaths of 112,000 people. Now that's great news, especially the part about new babies being born. But there's also a chronic shortage of housing and good-paying jobs in Israel. The economy in Israel is resilient, and there's even been an upsurge in manufacturing and some other industries. But tourism and agriculture are both still in a slump for obvious reasons. In terms of housing, thousands of homes and businesses have been damaged or even destroyed by enemy fire, including entire communities in the Galilee and along the northern border. On that that topic, the residents of communities near the Lebanese border are slowly returning to their homes a month after a ceasefire was reached with Hezbollah. But again, many of them have no homes to go back to and no jobs, no schools, etc., etc. It will take a massive effort by the government and the private sector, as well as charities like Vision for Israel, in order to bring these communities back to life. So once again, I urge you to visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. No donation is too big or too little, and every little bit helps. I saw a report from the National Jewish Fund, or the Jewish National Fund, in the newspaper this week, which said it could take 40 years for the forests in the Galilee to recover from the fires that were set by rockets. I hope that's an overestimation and we can get things back in order for the people in the Galilee sooner than later. Now back to the news. And staying on the northern border, as I mentioned previously, Israel and Hezbollah are a bit more than halfway through a 60-day ceasefire. By the end of the 60 days, Hezbollah forces are supposed to be completely withdrawn north of the Litani River, which runs east to west about 30 kilometers north of the Israeli border. The IDF is also supposed to have withdrawn south of the border by the end of the ceasefire. The Lebanese National Army and the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, peacekeepers, are supposed to be deployed in between the border and the Litani River in order to keep order in that region and act as a buffer between the two hostile forces. That's a great theory, and in a perfect world, or even in Europe or North America, such an arrangement might even work. But here in the Middle East, which is more imperfect than most other parts of the world, we're running into some serious problems with this plan. Hezbollah keeps trying to grab weapons, ammunition, and other gear they've stashed all over the southern Lebanese area so they can have it for a future battle, which is a violation of the ceasefire agreement. For its part, the IDF keeps finding more tunnels, bunkers, weapons caches, and rocket launchers that they need to demolish so they can't be used against us in Israel in the future, making them hesitant to leave southern Lebanon when the 60 days are over as planned. It needs to be mentioned that many of the tunnels, bunkers, and other military infrastructure that the IDF is finding is located close to, you know where, UNIFIL bases. This means that these peacekeepers, who were supposed to be preventing Hezbollah from deploying south of the Litani River, according to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, obviously didn't try very hard to do that. And at this point, no serious person anywhere should ask Israel to take the UN seriously or rely on UN peacekeepers to do anything useful. I know some people don't want to hear that, but it's an undeniable fact at this point. In fact, I have a suggestion for the United States President-elect Donald Trump. Why not replace the UN in New York with low-income housing and send the UN building outside the country somewhere else in the world? Maybe Greenland or Antarctica. Finally, the Lebanese National Army is simply not eager to carry out its part in this plan and are moving very slowly into this region of southern Lebanon. To be fair, it's hard to blame them since they don't really have the trained manpower, vehicles, weapons, fuel, money, and everything else that they need in order to complete the mission they're being asked to do. The whole idea that they're going to confront Hezbollah, which is a much more powerful military force, to make sure they stay away from the border with Israel, a country Lebanon is technically still at war with all the way back to 1948, has never been very realistic. And as I said before, the UNIFIL peacekeepers are also certainly not going to do anything to confront Hezbollah. So that leaves the IDF as the only serious force in the area that has the means and the motivation to realistically do the job. Realistically speaking. Now, Israel is therefore on the horns of a dilemma, because if the IDF doesn't redeploy south of the border according to the ceasefire agreement, Israel will be blamed again for the ceasefire failing, despite the fact that all the other parties to the agreement are also at fault. That never matters, and Israel always gets blamed when things don't go according to plan, no matter who else has failed to do their part. On the other hand, if the IDF does redeploy south of the border, it sets up the probability of future attacks by Hezbollah, and Israel might get blamed for that too. After all, Israel gets blamed for the war in Gaza, despite having pulled out in 2005 and then being attacked by Hamas on October 7, 2023. Now we're almost out of time, and there's one more big story I need to tell you about. Oh, I don't have a watch. I am speaking, of course, about the deteriorating health of our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think we should pray for him. On Sunday, he entered Jerusalem's Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital for surgery to have his prostate removed. Painful. He was supposed to stay there for several days of recovery and observation, which is probably a lot less than he needed, as the recovery time for this kind of surgery is usually between 4 and 6 weeks. But on Tuesday evening, he was compelled to leave the hospital and return to the Knesset in order to cast the deciding vote on a bill that his coalition needed in order to get their budget through. This was necessary because some of his coalition partners are unhappy with some things and decided to demonstrate their unhappiness by voting against the bill. That's a very simplistic explanation of a very complex set of issues, but it would take far too long to explain all the minutiae, the balagan going on to you. The point is, Netanyahu returned to the hospital exhausted, and I'm getting exhausted thinking about it. And that's not a good condition for the Prime Minister to be in. He will probably have no choice but to stay there for longer than the few days he planned to be there. Candidly, friends, I'm very surprised Bibi has been able to stay in his position as long as he has. He just turned 75 a few months ago, and he's working twice as hard as most people half his age. He gets less sleep than most people half his age too, and I'm getting tired too from it all, and it's been showing for a long time. This is the third major surgery he's had in the last year, and once again, that's 2 more surgeries than most people have in a year. That's just the physical stress he's under, friends. Can you even imagine the emotional strain he's under? Did I mention that his wife, Sarah, is unable to return to Israel right now from a trip to Miami because she's suffering from severe COVID symptoms? Did I mention that he's been spending several hours a day in court for the past week or so giving testimony in his own corruption trial? Friends, there's no doubt that Benjamin Netanyahu is no ordinary person, but there's also no doubt that even extraordinary people have limits. He might be coming close to his limits, and it's been a while since I've said this, but I will say it once again that we all need to be thinking about what we'll do on the day after Bibi. A lot will change in Israel very quickly on the day we wake up and hear the news that Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer in the picture, at least politically speaking. Now, elections will have to happen as soon as possible, and the results of those elections will be a massive turnover in the Knesset, with many old familiar faces gone and many new ones coming in. That's just for starters, and there's a lot more I could say about this, but we're out of time. Well, the good news I'll end on this week is that although there has been and continues to be a lot of shaking and quaking in Israel, the God who calls this nation his own is still on the throne of the universe, and his throne is not shaken at all. Those of us who belong to him can be confident that although things are getting kind of scary down here on earth, we can look up, for our redemption draweth nigh, or is coming soon. Hey, hi. Yeshua, come quickly. Well, until next week, friends, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel, and I don't mind a few prayers for myself as well. God bless you, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.